The Woman in the Shadows, a scary story from Reddit. Subscribe to Scary Stories Vault for great videos to relax, study, or just enjoy. My name is Joe, and what I'm about to share has haunted me for years. I've tried to make sense of it, rationalize it, but every attempt only leads me deeper into the darkness. I've replayed that night 1,000 times in my head, hoping that maybe, just maybe, it was all a bad dream. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. It was late October a couple of years ago, when I decided to move into the old apartment building on the corner of Franklin Street. The rent was ridiculously cheap for the area, and I'd just gotten out of a tough breakup. I needed a fresh start. The place was run down, sure, but I figured I could fix it up. It was only temporary anyway. I didn't plan to stay there long. The building had this weird, eerie vibe from the moment I stepped inside. The halls were dimly lit, and the elevator made this grinding noise that made me wonder if I'd make it to the 5th floor alive. But the rent was low, so I didn't care much. I shrugged it off, telling myself that it was just old. Everything was old in that part of town. I moved in during the afternoon. It was quiet, too quiet, really. There were no signs of other tenants around, no sound of footsteps or doors opening and closing. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just one of those buildings where people kept to themselves. I unpacked, set up my bed, and by the time night fell, I was exhausted. I collapsed into bed, the weight of the day pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. It must have been around 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up. You know that feeling, right? When something wakes you, but you can't figure out what it was. At first, I thought it might have been a creaky floorboard or the wind rattling the window. But then I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. I turned over in bed, my heart already pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. And that's when I saw her. She was standing in the corner of my room, a woman wearing a long black cloak that seemed to blend into the shadows. Her hair was dark and tangled, falling over her shoulders in loose, chaotic waves. Her face. God, I'll never forget her face. It was pale, almost gray, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. Her eyes were dark, so dark that it felt like they could swallow me whole. For what felt like an eternity, she just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just lay there, paralyzed, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. Was I still dreaming? No, I was awake, painfully awake. My pulse was loud in my ears, and every hair on my body stood on end. And then, without warning, she was gone. One blink, and she vanished, like she had never been there. I shot up in bed, turning on the light, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The room was empty. There was no sign of her. My rational brain tried to tell me that it had just been a hallucination, maybe a trick of the shadows. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe the stress of moving had messed with my head. I told myself that whatever I'd seen wasn't real. But no matter how much I tried to push it out of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that apartment. A few days passed without incident, and I started to relax, convincing myself that it had been a one-time thing. But then the noises started. At first, it was just little things. The sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door, even though I knew the building was nearly empty. I'd hear soft whispers in the dead of night, just on the edge of my hearing. Whenever I got up to investigate, there was nothing. No one. But then it got worse. One night, I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV when I heard it. A soft creak coming from the bedroom. My heart skipped a beat, but I forced myself to get up and check. As I stepped into the hallway, I could feel it. The cold. The air was frigid, like the temperature had dropped several degrees. I stood at the doorway to the bedroom, my hand shaking as I reached for the light switch. And there she was again, standing at the foot of my bed, staring at me with those dark, hollow eyes. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there frozen as she took a slow step toward me. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, like she wasn't used to walking. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. She took another step, and then another, her face expressionless, but her eyes never left mine. When she was only a few feet away from me, she stopped. I could feel the cold radiating off of her, seeping into my bones. For a long moment, we just stood there, locked in some kind of twisted standoff. And then she smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was slow, deliberate, like she was savoring the moment. Her lips curled back, revealing yellowed, decayed teeth. My stomach turned, and I felt bile rising in my throat. Suddenly, the light flickered, and she was gone again. Just like before. No sound, no movement, nothing. The room was empty, but I knew she had been there. I wasn't imagining it. I left the apartment that night. I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend, telling him I needed a break from the apartment. I didn't tell him why. How could I? How do you explain to someone that you're being haunted by a woman who disappears into thin air? For a few days, things were quiet. I stayed with my friend, went to work, and tried to convince myself that whatever was happening in that apartment wasn't following me, but I was wrong. One night, I was lying on the couch in my friend's apartment, scrolling through my phone when I felt it again. That creeping sensation of being watched. I sat up, my heart racing, and looked around the room. It was dark, but I could just make out the shapes of the furniture in the dim light from the street lamp outside. And then I saw her. She was standing in the doorway, watching me with those same dark, soulless eyes. I bolted upright, my hands shaking as I scrambled for my phone, but by the time I turned on the light, she was gone. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't escape her. No matter where I went, she followed. I was living in a constant state of fear, waiting for her to appear again. I finally decided to confront it. I needed to know who she was, what she wanted. I couldn't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next time she would show up. I started researching the apartment building. It took some digging, but I eventually found an old news article about a woman who had lived in my apartment decades ago. Her name was Clara, and she had been found dead in her bedroom under mysterious circumstances. The article didn't go into detail, but it was clear that something terrible had happened. As I read more, I discovered that Clara had been involved in some kind of cult, something dark and twisted. The details were vague, but there were rumors that she had been practicing black magic, trying to summon something, or someone. It all started to make sense. The cold, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. She wasn't just haunting the apartment. She was haunting me apartment. I tried to get rid of her. I brought in a priest, burned sage, did everything the internet told me to do, but nothing worked. Every night, she was there, watching me, waiting. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I couldn't focus on anything except the constant dread that had taken over my life. My friends noticed. They tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. No one could help me. And then, one night, it all came to a head. I was lying in bed, exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open, when I felt it again, that cold, suffocating presence. I didn't need to look. I knew she was there. But this time, something was different. She wasn't standing in the corner. She was standing right next to the bed, so close I could feel her breath on my skin. I turned my head slowly, and there she was, her face inches from mine. This time, she didn't smile. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite understand. And then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, she spoke. "You can't run from me." I don't know how I found the strength to move, but I did. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door, and didn't stop running until I was out of the building. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I left the city the next day. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just packed my things and left. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was far away from that apartment, from her. It's been years now, and I still haven't seen her again. But I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, waiting for the right moment to come back. I don't think I'll ever truly be free of her. And every night, as I lie in bed, I can't help but wonder, how long will it be before she finds me again?